The Galactic Empire had waited for this moment for decades, the grand meeting with an alien species whose warships had hovered ominously at the edge of the Empire's domain for years. For as long as anyone could remember, the Zharian Collective had been whispered about in fear and awe. They were a mysterious and impenetrable force, their sleek vessels vanishing into the black void of space just as easily as they appeared. Yet, after cycles of tense standoffs, an envoy had finally been sent, a sign, the Empire hoped, that their mighty military might have intimidated the Zharians into peace or submission. Captain Selene Argon sat rigidly in the Imperial Council chamber, her crisp uniform adorned with the medals of a career spent on the fringes of Imperial space, fighting skirmishes with pirates and taming rebellious outposts. She wasn't sure why she had been selected for the delegation. She was a warrior, not a diplomat. Beside her sat her superior, Admiral Rovan Thane, a towering man with a cold demeanor and eyes that never seemed to blink. Thane had made it clear that this meeting was a formality. "We are here to show strength," he'd said in the briefing. "The Zharian envoy will see that resistance is futile, and this war will end before it begins." When the Zharian envoy finally arrived, the first surprise was their size. General Tar was not the towering, reptilian figure the propaganda vids had painted but rather a lithe creature no taller than Selene. With ash-gray skin and eyes like glowing embers, Tar exuded an unsettling calm, their movements deliberate and alien. They wore no visible armor, just a simple cloak that seemed to ripple with faint bioluminescence. Admiral Thane opened the meeting with his usual bluster. "General Tar, you stand before the mightiest empire in this galaxy. If you've come seeking terms, we may grant mercy to your people, provided you surrender immediately." Tar tilted their heads slightly, an amused smile curling at their lips. "Admiral Thane, your empire's arrogance precedes you. I am not here to discuss surrender. I am here to educate you on the folly of provoking a Deathworlder species." The room fell silent. The term Deathworlder was unfamiliar to most of the gathered officials, but Selene had heard it once during her early years in the Academy. It referred to species that evolved on planets so hostile they made most other worlds look like paradise. Deathworlders were a rarity in the galaxy, their survival a testament to their resilience, adaptability, and, often, their ruthlessness. Tar began to speak, their voice steady and hypnotic. "Your empire thrives on conquest, yes? You see the galaxy as a collection of resources and territories to be claimed. But there are worlds, places your ships would not dare to land, where life exists not despite the conditions but because of them. My people come from such a world, Admiral. A world you would call uninhabitable." As Tar spoke, a holographic projection filled the room, showing a barren, windswept planet. Its surface was scorched, riddled with towering storms and rivers of molten rock. Jagged mountains loomed over wastelands crawling with creatures that seemed to defy reason, massive, insectoid predators with razor-sharp appendages, swarms of flying beasts that blotted out the sun, and plant life that lashed out violently at anything that dared to approach. Selene couldn't help but lean forward in her seat, her heart racing despite herself. This was no simple war negotiation. Tar was delivering a warning. The Zharian general continued. "My people were not born warriors. We were born survivors. Every day on Zharis Prime is a battle. Against the elements. Against predators. Against starvation and disease. Our ancestors did not build cities, they built fortresses. Every breath we take is earned." Thane scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "And what does this primitive history lesson have to do with us? Your Deathworld tales may frighten children, General, but the Empire does not bow to bedtime stories." Tar turned their ember-like eyes on Thane, unflinching. "It is not a story, Admiral. It is a lesson. You have built your empire on the assumption that all species are as fragile as your own. You have never faced a species like mine. We do not fight to conquer. We fight to survive. And if you bring war to us, we will teach you what that means." Selene felt a chill run down her spine. For the first time, she noticed the quiet confidence in Tar's posture. They were not boasting or threatening, they were stating a fact. Enough of this, Thane growled, rising to his feet. You speak of survival as though it makes you invincible. But even the strongest fortress can be crushed. The Empire's fleet will reduce your planet to ash if you refuse to submit. Zharis' expression didn't change, but their voice dropped an octave, a subtle menace lacing their words. Your fleet would not make it past our outer defenses. But, if you insist on testing us, I will share one story. A single tale from my world. Perhaps then you will understand. The hologram shifted again, this time showing a dense, jungle-like region teeming with life. Tar narrated. This is the Scarred Vale, a region on Zharis Prime where the air itself is toxic, the ground unstable, and the creatures, unforgiving. One cycle, a colony ship from another world crash-landed there. Its occupants were not Deathworlders. They were like you, soft, unprepared, full of hope. We discovered the wreckage weeks later. Do you know what we found? The hologram zoomed in, revealing scenes that made Selene's stomach churn. Survivors, ragged and terrified, were shown fending off grotesque predators. Makeshift barricades had been erected, but they were laughably inadequate against the relentless onslaught. Then the images shifted again, showing the aftermath, a camp reduced to rubble, bloodied remains strewn across the jungle floor. Zharis' voice was almost a whisper now. They lasted 47 days. None survived. Thane sneered. A tragic tale, no doubt, but hardly relevant to our meeting. We are not some hapless colonists. We are the Empire. Tar leaned forward, their glowing eyes narrowing. And I am offering you a choice, Admiral. Leave us in peace, or become the next tale we tell. For a moment, the chamber was silent, the weight of Zharis' words hanging in the air. Selene glanced around the room, noting the unease on the faces of her colleagues. Even Thane, for all his bravado, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Finally, Selene broke the silence, her voice steady but laced with curiosity. General Tar, if your people are as resilient as you claim, why even entertain this meeting? Surely you do not fear us. Tar turned to her, a faint smile playing on their lips. Fear? No, Captain Argon. This is not about fear. It is about wisdom. The galaxy is vast, and conflict is inevitable. But there is wisdom in choosing one's battles. I came here to see if your empire possesses that wisdom. Selene met Zharis' gaze, feeling an odd sense of respect for the alien general. This was no savage brute, as imperial propaganda had suggested, but a strategist, a survivor. And though she loathed to admit it, she could not shake the feeling that the Empire had underestimated them. As the meeting concluded, Thane stormed out of the chamber, his pride clearly wounded. Selene lingered, her thoughts racing. Zharis' words had struck a chord, and she couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if the Empire ignored their warning? The holographic images of Zharis Prime and Zharis' unsettling narrative haunted Captain Selene Argon as she returned to her quarters aboard the Ecliptica, the Empire's flagship. While Admiral Thane barked orders to prepare for war, dismissing Zharis' warning as mere bluster, Selene couldn't shake the eerie calm in the Zharian general's voice. The images of the Scarred Vale and the carnage it had wrought replayed in her mind like a broken transmission. She knew there was something more here, something the Empire wasn't prepared for. The fleet had been ordered to assemble near the Zharian border. Thousands of warships, from nimble fighters to colossal destroyers, formed a shimmering armada that dwarfed entire moons. Thane was in his element, a man intoxicated by the spectacle of imperial might. To him, this was a show of force that would cow the Zharians into submission. Selene, however, felt differently. The galaxy was littered with the ruins of species that had underestimated Deathworlders. A sudden alert blared through the corridors of the Ecliptica. Selene snapped out of her thoughts and hurried to the bridge, where Thane stood, his fists clenched as he stared at the tactical display. The Zharian fleet had appeared on the outer fringes of the Empire's formation. Unlike the sprawling might of the Imperial Armada, the Zharian fleet was a fraction of its size, barely 300 ships. Yet, their triangular, obsidian hulls gleamed ominously, their formation unnervingly precise. Is this all they've got? Thane scoffed, his voice echoing across the bridge. Pathetic. Selene's eyes narrowed as she studied the Zharian fleet. Their positioning wasn't defensive. It was surgical. She recognized the pattern from her academy days, a tactic known as the Death Lance, designed to pierce through larger fleets by exploiting gaps and overwhelming them with precision strikes. The Zharians weren't preparing to defend themselves. They were preparing to attack. Before she could voice her concerns, a transmission came through. General Tar's face appeared on the display, calm as ever. Admiral Thane, Tar began, their voice devoid of emotion, you have ignored my warning. Your fleet encroaches upon our territory, a violation we cannot overlook. I will offer you one final chance to withdraw. Thane smirked. You seem to misunderstand the situation, General. It is you who should be retreating. Surrender now, and perhaps we'll spare your pitiful planet from annihilation. Tar tilted their head, as though examining a particularly stubborn child. Your arrogance will be your undoing. Very well. Let this be a lesson in humility. The transmission ended abruptly. A tense silence filled the bridge. Selene's stomach tightened as she watched the Zharian fleet begin to move. The first wave of Zharian ships surged forward with unnatural precision. Their vessels moved like a school of predators, weaving through the Imperial fleet's outer defenses with a grace that belied their deadly intent. The Imperial gunners fired in unison, their laser cannons and missile batteries lighting up the void. But the Zharians were ready. Their ships activated energy shields that shimmered momentarily before absorbing the incoming fire. Then they struck. Selene could only watch in stunned silence as the Zharian fleet tore into the Empire's formation. Their weapons weren't like the Empire's, they didn't rely on brute force. Instead, they used pulse disruptors that overloaded the systems of Imperial ships, rendering them defenseless. Entire squadrons were disabled within seconds, their engines flickering out like dying stars. How is this possible? Thane roared, slamming his fist against the console. Our ships are superior in every way. Selene stepped forward, her voice firm. Admiral, their tactics are designed to exploit our weaknesses. They're using precision strikes to disable us before we can react. We need to regroup and adapt. Silence. Thane snapped, his face red with fury. We outnumber them 10-1. This is nothing more than a minor setback. Order the fleet to press forward. Selene gritted her teeth but obeyed. Orders were orders, even when they were foolish. The Imperial fleet pressed forward, but the Zharian ships adapted seamlessly. They split into smaller groups, flanking the Empire's vessels and targeting critical systems. The Ecliptica itself shuddered as a Zharian strike disabled one of its shield generators. For hours, the battle raged on, and the Empire's losses mounted. Thane's arrogance blinded him to the reality of the situation. Every time the Imperial fleet attempted to regroup, the Zharians anticipated their moves, striking with surgical precision. Selene could see it clearly now, this wasn't just strategy. The Zharians were fighting with the instincts of a species that had survived the deadliest conditions imaginable. They didn't just outthink their enemies, they outlasted them. As the battle wore on, Selene realized the true horror of the situation. The Empire's fleet, designed for overwhelming firepower and large-scale battles, was ill-equipped to face an enemy that thrived on chaos and adaptability. The Zharian ships weren't just surviving, they were winning. Admiral, Selene said, her voice cutting through the chaos, we need to retreat and reassess. If we continue like this, we'll lose the entire fleet. Thane turned to her, his eyes blazing with defiance. Retreat? Are you suggesting we run from these savages? I'm suggesting we survive, Selene shot back. If we don't adapt, we'll be annihilated. This isn't a battle we can win with brute force. Thane stared at her for a moment, his pride warring with the grim reality unfolding before him. Finally, he slammed his fist on the console. Order a tactical retreat. We'll regroup at the rendezvous point. Selene nodded, relief washing over her as she relayed the order. The Imperial fleet began to pull back, but the Zharians didn't pursue. Instead, they held their position, their ships hovering like silent predators watching a wounded prey retreat. As the fleet limped away, Selene couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and dread. The Empire had survived this battle, but at a cost that was impossible to ignore. Thane's pride had nearly led them to ruin, and the Zharians had proven themselves to be a far more formidable enemy than anyone had anticipated. Back aboard the Ecliptica, Selene found herself summoned to Thane's quarters. She expected another tirade, but when she arrived, she found him pacing, his expression grim. "You spoke out of turn on the bridge," he began, his tone colder than usual. "But, you were right. The Zharians are unlike any enemy we've faced. I won't admit that to anyone else, but I'll need your insight moving forward." Selene crossed her arms, meeting his gaze. "If you want my insight, Admiral, here it is. The Zharians aren't fighting for territory or glory. They're fighting because it's in their nature. If we don't understand that, we'll lose this war before it even begins." Thane nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll have to change the way we fight. Starting now." Selene left his quarters feeling a flicker of hope but also a deep sense of foreboding. The Empire might adapt, but the Zharians weren't just an enemy. They were survivors. And if the Empire pushed them too far, they would find out what true survival instincts looked like. As she gazed out at the stars, Selene thought of Taras' warning. The Zharian general had given them a choice, but the Empire's arrogance had already set them on a path of destruction. And somewhere out there, Tar was waiting, ready to teach the galaxy's most powerful empire the meaning of humility. The battered Imperial fleet regrouped at the designated rendezvous point, a remote star system far from the contested Zharian border. The surviving ships floated like wounded animals, their hulls scarred and their energy signatures flickering. Crew members scrambled to assess the damage, while the high-ranking officers convened in the Ecliptica's war room to plot their next move. Captain Selene Argon entered the chamber with trepidation. Admiral Thane stood at the center, his commanding presence as imposing as ever, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed his frustration. Around him, holographic displays showed tactical maps of the battlefield they had fled, alongside casualty reports that painted a grim picture. Nearly a third of the Empire's fleet had been destroyed or rendered inoperable. The Zharians, by contrast, had sustained minimal losses. Selene joined the circle of officers, her mind racing. She had spent the sleepless hours since their retreat poring over every detail of the battle. The Zharians' precision, their uncanny ability to anticipate Imperial maneuvers, and their unorthodox weaponry, all of it pointed to an enemy far more dangerous than the Empire had ever faced. Thane slammed a fist onto the console, silencing the murmurs of the gathered officers. "This is unacceptable," he growled. "We are the Empire. We do not retreat, and we do not lose. Yet these creatures have humiliated us in front of the galaxy." Selene stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. "Admiral, with respect, we didn't lose because of their numbers or firepower. We lost because we fought them on their terms. The Zharians thrive in chaos. They've been adapting to hostile conditions for millennia. If we don't change our approach, this war will end before it begins." Thane's eyes narrowed, but he didn't dismiss her outright. Instead, he gestured to the tactical display. "Then what do you propose, Captain? Shall we beg them for peace?" Selene held his gaze. "We don't need to beg, but we do need to think differently. The Zharians are testing us, probing our weaknesses. They're not just fighting with weapons, they're fighting with their culture, their survival instincts. If we want to stand a chance, we need to understand what we're up against." Thane frowned, his skepticism evident. "And how do you propose we do that?" Before Selene could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "By learning from the enemy." All heads turned to the doorway, where a figure stepped into the light. It was Commander Derek Voss, the Empire's leading intelligence officer. A wiry man with sharp features and an unsettling grin, Voss had a reputation for unconventional methods. "I've been studying the Zharians for years," Voss continued, his voice smooth and confident. "Their culture, their tactics, their strengths and weaknesses. And I can tell you this, they don't see this as a war. To them, it's a hunt. And we're the prey. Thane's lip curled in disdain. If you've been studying them for so long, why didn't you warn us about their capabilities before this disaster? Voss shrugged, unbothered by the accusation. Because no one listens to the intelligence division until it's too late. But now that you're paying attention, I have a plan. The room fell silent as Voss approached the central console. With a few quick commands, he brought up a holographic map of Zharis Prime and its surrounding space. The Zharians are masters of ambush and attrition. They don't fight fair, and they don't fight by the rules we're used to. If we want to survive, we need to outthink them. That starts with understanding their world. He gestured to the hologram of Zharis Prime, its volatile surface teeming with activity. Their planet is a death trap, but it's also their greatest asset. They've spent generations turning it into a fortress. If we want to strike at the heart of their strength, we need to infiltrate their territory and learn their secrets. And to do that, we'll need a team willing to risk everything. Thane's scowl deepened. You're suggesting a reconnaissance mission? Into their territory? That's suicide. Voss smirked. Not if we're careful. We send a small, elite team, stealth ships, advanced tech, the best operatives we have. They'll gather intelligence, sabotage key infrastructure, and, if possible, find a way to disrupt their fleet's coordination. It's risky, yes. But it's our best shot. Selene's mind raced as she processed Voss's proposal. It was dangerous, but it made sense. The Empire couldn't afford another head-on clash with the Zharians. They needed to level the playing field. I'll volunteer, she said, surprising even herself. I've studied their tactics firsthand. I know what we're up against. If this mission has any chance of succeeding, I want to be part of it. Thane eyed her skeptically but nodded. Very well. But if you fail, Captain, the consequences will be on your head. The reconnaissance team was assembled within days. Comprised of the Empire's most skilled operatives, it included Selene, Commander Voss, and a handful of seasoned specialists. They boarded a stealth frigate, the Shadowfall, equipped with the latest cloaking technology and a suite of experimental weapons. Their mission was clear: infiltrate Zharian space, gather intelligence, and disrupt the enemy's operations. As the Shadowfall slipped into Zharian territory, Selene felt a knot of tension in her chest. The ship's cloaking system kept them hidden from enemy sensors, but the crew knew the risks. One mistake, one miscalculation, and they would be discovered. The first obstacle came in the form of a Zharian patrol. A squadron of sleek, black ships hovered near a planetary outpost, their energy signatures pulsing like the heartbeat of a predator. The Shadowfall's crew held their breath as they navigated past the patrol, the ship's cloaking field flickering under the strain. Once they reached Zharis Prime's orbit, the real challenge began. The planet's atmosphere was a maelstrom of toxic storms and electromagnetic interference. Voss directed the team to a remote landing site in the Scarred Vale, the same region Tar had described during the meeting. As the Shadowfall descended, Selene caught her first glimpse of the planet's surface. It was worse than she had imagined. Rivers of molten rock snaked through jagged canyons, while towering storms crackled with violet lightning. The air was thick with ash, and the ground seemed to writhe with the movement of countless predatory creatures. Welcome to hell, Voss muttered, strapping on his environmental suit. The team disembarked, their suits shielding them from the planet's hostile conditions. Selene led the way, her weapon at the ready, as they navigated the treacherous terrain. The Scarred Vale lived up to its reputation. The team encountered colossal insectoid predators, their armored bodies impervious to conventional weapons. They were forced to use ingenuity and teamwork to survive, deploying traps and distractions to evade the creatures. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, they discovered something unexpected: a network of underground tunnels carved into the rock. Voss theorized that these tunnels were part of the Zharians' planetary defense system, providing shelter and mobility in the harsh environment. Inside the tunnels, the team found evidence of Zharian technology, biomechanical systems that blended organic and artificial components. The walls pulsed with a faint, rhythmic glow, as though the tunnels themselves were alive. Selene couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Their suspicions were confirmed when they stumbled upon a Zharian outpost. Dozens of Zharian warriors moved with quiet efficiency, their ashen skin blending seamlessly with the environment. The team observed from a hidden vantage point, recording everything they could. But their luck ran out when a patrol spotted them. Alarms blared, and the team was forced into a desperate firefight. The Zharians fought with an intensity that bordered on feral, their weapons precise and devastating. Selene and her team used every trick they had, but the Zharians' knowledge of the terrain gave them the upper hand. One by one, the team members fell, until only Selene and Voss remained. They retreated deeper into the tunnels, pursued by relentless Zharian forces. Just when it seemed they were cornered, Selene spotted an opening, a narrow fissure leading to the surface. With no other choice, they climbed through the fissure, emerging into the chaos of a Zharian storm. Lightning illuminated the landscape as Selene and Voss ran for their lives, the screams of their pursuers echoing behind them. The mission had gone horribly wrong, but Selene had learned one thing: the Zharians were not just survivors. They were predators. And the Empire had made the grave mistake of becoming their prey. Selene and Voss stumbled through the dense, toxic jungle of Zharis Prime, their breaths ragged and labored within their environmental suits. The storm raged around them, violet lightning arcing across the sky and illuminating the nightmarish terrain. The pursuing Zharian warriors were relentless, their cries and footsteps growing louder with each passing moment. Selene gritted her teeth, her mind racing to find a way out of the seemingly hopeless situation. "Keep moving," she shouted over the roaring wind, her grip tightening on her weapon. Voss, limping from an earlier skirmish, struggled to keep pace but nodded grimly. The terrain shifted suddenly, the ground beneath them crumbling as they reached the edge of a vast chasm. Selene skidded to a halt, staring down at the abyss below. Lava bubbled and churned at the bottom, casting an eerie orange glow that painted the jagged cliffs in shadow. "We're trapped," Voss muttered, leaning heavily against a rock. "This is it." Selene scanned the area desperately, her mind refusing to accept defeat. Then she saw it, a narrow ledge winding along the cliffside, barely wide enough to walk on. It wasn't much, but it was their only option. "Come on," she said, pulling Voss to his feet. "We're not done yet." They edged onto the ledge, their movements slow and deliberate as the storm battered them. The Zharian warriors reached the chasm moments later, their glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. Selene could feel their gaze, predatory and unyielding, as they assessed the situation. Then, without hesitation, the Zharians began leaping onto the ledge, their agility unnerving. "They're coming!" Voss hissed. Selene raised her weapon, aiming at the loose rock above the ledge. With a carefully placed shot, she dislodged a section of the cliff, sending a cascade of debris crashing down. The Zharians dodged with inhuman speed, but the temporary barrier bought them precious seconds. "Move!" Selene barked, urging Voss forward. The ledge eventually widened, leading to a narrow tunnel that appeared to burrow deep into the cliffside. They hurried inside, the sound of falling rocks and distant snarls fading behind them. The air was stifling, thick with the metallic tang of minerals and the distant hum of Zharian technology. Selene activated her suit's light, illuminating the jagged walls as they pressed onward. "This isn't over," Voss said, his voice strained. "They'll find us." Selene nodded grimly. "Then we need to find them first. We need leverage." "Leverage? Against them?" Voss scoffed, though there was no humor in his tone. What kind of leverage could possibly matter to Deathworlders? Selene didn't answer. She wasn't sure herself, but she knew they couldn't return to the Empire empty-handed. They needed something, a weakness, a vulnerability, anything that could shift the balance of power. As they ventured deeper into the tunnels, they stumbled upon something unexpected. The walls began to glow faintly, the rhythmic pulse of light growing stronger with each step. The hum of machinery filled the air, accompanied by an otherworldly vibration that resonated through the ground. They emerged into a vast cavern, and what they saw stopped them in their tracks. towering structures, seemingly grown rather than built, filled the space. Bioluminescent veins snaked across the walls, connecting to organic machinery that pulsed with energy. At the center of the cavern stood a massive structure resembling a tree, its branches crackling with raw power. Around it, Zharian warriors moved with purpose, tending to the living machines. This, Voss whispered, his eyes wide. This is their command center. Selene's heart raced. If they could sabotage this, it might cripple the Zharian fleet and give the Empire a fighting chance. But the cavern was heavily guarded, and they were outnumbered and outgunned. We can't take this on head first, Selene murmured. We need to be smart. Voss glanced at the glowing veins that stretched across the cavern. These systems are interconnected. If we can disrupt the main node, it might cascade through their entire network. Selene nodded, formulating a plan. I'll create a distraction. You find a way to overload the node. Are you insane? Voss hissed. You won't survive. Survival isn't the goal, Selene said firmly. Finishing the mission is. Before Voss could argue, Selene stepped out from the shadows, firing a volley of shots at the nearest Zharian warriors. Alarms blared as the warriors sprang into action, their movements impossibly fast. Selene retreated, drawing them away from the central structure and into the labyrinth of tunnels. Voss, meanwhile, worked quickly. He followed the glowing veins to a cluster of pulsating nodes near the base of the tree-like structure. Using his suit's interface, he hacked into the Zharian system, his fingers flying over the controls. The organic machinery resisted, its bioluminescent veins writhing like living things, but Voss pressed on, overriding its defenses. Selene's distraction was brutal. The Zharians pursued her relentlessly, their weapons carving through the rock walls around her. She ducked and weaved, using every ounce of her training to stay one step ahead. But she knew she couldn't hold them off forever. Her suit's power levels were dropping, and her ammunition was nearly depleted. In the cavern, Voss finally breached the system's defenses. The veins began to flicker erratically, the hum of machinery rising to a deafening pitch. He activated the overload sequence, setting a timer for detonation. As he worked, a shadow fell over him. He turned to see a Zharian warrior, its eyes glowing with fury, raising its weapon. Selene appeared out of nowhere, tackling the warrior before it could fire. The two tumbled to the ground, locked in a brutal struggle. Selene fought with everything she had, but the Zharian's strength was overwhelming. Just as it seemed she would lose, she grabbed a jagged shard of rock and drove it into the warrior's throat. It collapsed with a gurgling hiss. "We need to go!" Voss shouted. Selene staggered to her feet, her vision swimming. Together, they fled the cavern as the countdown ticked closer to 0. The tunnels trembled as the overload reached its peak, a blinding explosion ripping through the Zharian command center. The shockwave hurled Selene and Voss out of the tunnel and onto the planet's surface. They lay in the ash and rubble, gasping for breath as the ground shook beneath them. In the distance, Zharian ships faltered, their energy signatures flickering. The explosion had disrupted their network, throwing their fleet into chaos. For the first time, the Zharians were on the defensive. Hours later, the Shadowfall extracted Selene and Voss, their mission a grim success. Back aboard the ship, Selene collapsed into a chair, her body battered but her resolve unbroken. Voss stood beside her, his expression unreadable. "You know this won't stop them," he said quietly. "They'll adapt. They always do." Selene nodded. "Maybe. But now the Empire knows what it's up against. We'll adapt, too." As the Shadowfall slipped away from Zharian space, Selene gazed out at the distant stars. She knew this wasn't the end of the war. The Zharians would retaliate, and the Empire would face its greatest challenge yet. But for now, they had survived. And in surviving, they had learned. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun.